today. We have 2 more webinars left for this series. A few things first, please notice that you have been muted upon entry. This is to help reduce any background noise, but you can unmute yourself and ask questions. Another way to ask questions is through the chat box. It's on the right corner of your screen listed as chat. You can always ask questions in the chat box, or you can also utilize the Q&A chat section as well. We will have 2 people monitoring each of those, and they can jump in and ask the questions for you. We'll also have some natural stopping points for questions. And that's another time for you to utilize questions or ask your questions. Also, we may do a few yes or no questions throughout the webinar. And to answer yes or no, if you look under the participant section, you can see a hand, a check mark, and an X. We're going to utilize the check mark feature as a yes and an X as a no. If you'd all like to just click the check mark to see if you all understand how that works. I see some check marks showing up right now. Awesome, and so that's what we would use as a yes and an X as a no. Just remember that you'll have to uncheck these because it'll stay on for the duration of the slides if you don't uncheck that. All right. Our presenter wants everyone to know that he enjoys your engagement and prefers to be interrupted with questions. So please feel free to unmute yourself if you have a question that needs to be answered immediately. We will have 3, maybe 4 polls for you to answer, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to those, but those polls will show up at a certain stopping point, and during the middle of this presentation, we will have a quick break, and there will be a poll feature during that particular break. We were able to get approved for 1.5 CEUs for each of these sessions for your wastewater license for the state of Tennessee. For folks that are viewing this training as a group, we will need your email and names and licenses for all the attendees, and we would ask that you can, well, not your email, we'd ask that you email your names and license numbers to Allie Frampton, and her email should be listed in the chat box at allie.frampton@tn.gov. So if you don't see it in there, just let us know, and we'll put in the chat feature again, and you can email the names and license numbers to her. The session will be recorded, and we will make it available on our Tennessee Plant Optimization website, along with the previous webinars. Also, if you have Microsoft Teams, you may want to turn off that feature or exit out of it, because sometimes it will slow down the WebEx, and you may experience some difficulties viewing the WebEx presentation today. I think that's all I have for now. I'm going to pass it off over to Karina, and she'll address, or Bree will be talking about the CEUs.
Hi, if you would give us an update on the CEUs and how they're doing.
Okay, so all the attendance information, the data has been submitted up until last week. So I'm currently still working on the data from February 24th, but everything else has been submitted. So hopefully you guys have seen that stuff start to show up in your account. So if you can check that and just make sure it's there, that would be awesome. If it's not, you can email me and let me know, or just drop me something in the chat, and I'll start checking into it.
Thank you, Bree. All right, so we're ready. My name is Trina Bynum, and I work for the Division of Water Resources as their engineer, and I've been working with plant optimization since 2014. Let me welcome Mr. Brent Weaver to the 5th session of our WebEx series. He's a professional engineer and a licensed operator, and today he will talk about nutrient removal in SBRs. Sequence and batch reactors. Hope you enjoy the presentation. Please do ask questions and send us comments. We do appreciate your engagement, and Brent loves the interaction. So without further ado, Brent, please take it away.
All right, thanks. Let me get my video working here, maybe. Oh, that's probably good. Look at that. What do you? All right. Get that crazy box out of the way so you don't have to look at that. Well, this is Knoxville on the Sun Sphere on a clear, beautiful day. It's like a spring day, so maybe it's coming. I thank you, everyone. Thank you from TDEC for allowing me to speak, and those of you who are suffering through yet another presentation. We've had 4. Today is number 5, and the focus today is sequencing batch reactors. We're going to talk about how they're designed to work, and they're designed really for nitrogen removal, right? They're not designed for phosphorus removal. But we're going to talk about tricks to make them remove phosphorus, and I'll give a couple of case studies. Don't have a lot, have a few. So it's a very focused conversation today. My presentation doesn't occupy a whole bunch of slides. So we're either going to have dead air time, or I'm going to fill it at the end, or people are going to ask questions and make comments. And I think we can allow the discussion to stray a bit today if there's an interest in talking about things in the field of wastewater and beyond nutrient removal, beyond SBRs. But we'll give those questions and comments obviously the priority. After today's session, we can have one more, the focus section. That was on conventional and extended aeration activated sludge, how to dial in nitrogen and phosphorus removal for facilities already designed for it, but mostly for facilities not. So creative ways to get nutrient removal out of facilities, whether designed for it or not. And what I'm really hoping, and I think TDEC is the reason that they're supporting all this, is the base information that we discussed in the first 3 weeks to get that fundamental foundation understanding of nutrient removal so that you as operators have more in your toolbox that you can apply for nutrient removal. And then finally, we'll do some whiteboard sessions. We'll talk about some plants, and it'll be stump to chump. We'll put some aerial views of plants up. We'll have some plant chief operators, superintendents talk about their facilities, what they'd like to get out of them, what's in the way of nutrient removal, what they've tried, what they're willing to try, and maybe come up with some ideas. It should be fun. It's usually a very popular session. But for now, let's take a break and do our first polling question, and I'll climb up and hand it off to the behind the curtains team here.
All right, let me open the poll for y'all. The poll is now open. You should see it on the right. Please answer the question, which is, on a scale from 1 to 5, how much do you know about nutrient removal and SBRs, with 5 being expert and 1 being new to the topic? I'll give it about another minute, and then I'll close out the poll, and you're going to be able to take a look at it. All right, looks like everyone just about answered, so I'm going to close it here in a few more seconds. Do you see it, Grant?
I do.
All right. I'll hand it over to you.
All right, thank you. All right, lucky you all. I am back. Now, if I can get that big block out of your way so you can see what's going on. There we go. Well, it's no surprise to me, a modest group. The majority of you are rating yourself on the low end of nutrient knowledge for SBR, so that's why you're tuning in, and I'm pretty confident that we'll raise your knowledge level so that by the end, let's get some people up, maybe all at least to the 3s, if not the 4s. Maybe we have some experts out there too. So to begin, let's do a little review. I want to talk about nitrogen first, and then phosphorus, and then we'll talk about the SBRs in particular. So for nitrogen removal, right, it's a two-step process. The first step is oxygen-rich, BOD poor, and there's some parameters that the bacteria like to thrive. They like a pH of at least 6.5, so slightly acidic they can take. They're more tolerant than the phosphorus bacteria, we'll see in a minute. They're sensitive to temperature, but nowhere near as sensitive as what we thought maybe 10 or 20 years ago. Throughout Montana, treatment plants are removing ammonia year-round. The second step is when the ammonia goes away, the nitrates are formed. It's still a form of nitrogen. It's still there. You've not removed any of the total nitrogen. You just converted it from one soluble form to another soluble form. So the second and final step is to take that nitrate, convert it to nitrogen gas, and the nitrogen literally bubbles out of the wastewater treatment plant tankage and goes into the atmosphere, which is 3/4 nitrogen. For this to happen, you need pretty much the opposite environment. Instead of an oxygen-rich, you need oxygen-poor. There can be a little bit of free oxygen in there, but the less the better. You need BOD for the bacteria to grow, and if the environment's good enough for the bacteria that remove ammonia, pH and mixed liquor concentration is high enough, then the environment in that regard is good enough for the bacteria that remove nitrate. So drilling a little deeper in here, the first step is ammonia removal. You've heard me talk about this tool, the ORP. I really like it. So for ammonia removal, we need an ORP in the positive range. I like to use a target of about positive 150. And usually, since most treatment plants that do have automatic control, let me repeat that, those treatment plants that do have automatic control typically have a DO feedback. So my preferred way then of setting the controls on the DO is to use an ORP, find out at what ORP you're getting good ammonia removal, then set your DO feedback loop accordingly. So use the ORP to help me set the DO limit. If pH drops below 6.5, you're going to have problems with ammonia removal. You may remove some ammonia but get a whole bunch of nitrite, which is probably not a place you want to be. So in those rare circumstances where pH is an issue, it's something that you need to monitor. Ammonia removal typically happens after most of the BOD is gone in the aeration tank. So if you were to have a long, skinny aeration tank, and you were to take the ammonia every 5 feet, you would find that there would be a point, really wouldn't change too much, and then it's going to drop off. And where it starts to drop off significantly is where the BOD is basically consumed by the bacteria. And what do they do with the bacteria? They use it to grow new bacteria. Rule of thumb, and I wouldn't give much credence to that 4+ hours of retention time. There's a lot of factors, and the concentration of the bacteria really helps. The more bacteria you have, as long as you have the oxygen to keep those bacteria alive, then the shorter the retention time. It's a matter of how many bacteria there are and their condition of the BOD in the tank. So the whole process goes something like this. You add oxygen, you start with ammonia. As you do, the hydrogen ions go into solution. That adds to the acidity of the water. The pH will drop as ammonia, they self-pollute their own environment, I guess not unlike us, left to their own evil ways. And eventually the bacteria, multiple families of bacteria will convert ammonia to nitrate. And as they do, you look at the top there, there's a lot of oxygen that gets consumed. So it requires a lot of aeration, more aeration than simple BOD removal. And it makes the water more acid, which means it consumes alkalinity. And at the first session, you may recall, I used the analogy of ice cubes in a glass of water. I have a glass of water right here to the side, and it has a lot of ice cubes in it. Those ice cubes are buffering my water, keeping it cold. As the ice cubes get smaller, that's a preliminary indication, right, that the water is getting ever warmer. The same with alkalinity and pH. The alkalinity is a buffer, and if you can envision the ice cubes, the alkalinity melting away, as they melt away, then your pH is getting ready to make a big decline. So a great process tool for waters that have a pH issue is to monitor alkalinity. All right, the second step of nitrogen removal, the second and final step, is a biological process. And looking at the ORP here, we're straddling the zero, at least the YSI chart, which is as good a chart as any, which is why I use it. That's the typical range that you'll see in the textbooks. I like to see it a little more negative, although I've worked in facilities that do just fine with a slightly positive ORP for nitrate removal. So I like to start with a target of maybe -100 and then see what works best from there. And I can always adjust the target. If all you have is a DO probe and you don't have an ORP, then you're going to look to as close to zero as you can get on that DO. If you're getting much over 0.2, 0.3, you probably have too much oxygen, and that's going to interfere. More often than not, the big driver is going to be BOD. Typical plant may have something like 20 milligrams per liter of nitrate after the ammonia is removed. So if you need 5 to 10 times as much BOD, you're needing 100 to 200 milligrams per liter of BOD just to drive denitrification. It's not always there, is it, particularly during I&I events. Another retention time, the rule of thumb, I like that retention time if you're cycling the air on and off, which we will be doing in the SBR. So you're going to want the air on for a while, long enough to remove ammonia, and off long enough to remove nitrates when we get into the SBR details. So we started with the nitrate, right, that was created when we removed the ammonia. It's still a soluble form of nitrogen. It's consumed some of the oxygen, so that's good for the environment. But the nutrient, the nitrogen, is still there. So if we want to get that nutrient out of our wastewater and into the atmosphere where it won't pollute our receiving water, it consumes BOD as it goes to nitrogen gas. So that's pretty interesting, right? So if this process is consuming BOD, it's advantageous to any facility that's removing ammonia to go to this step, because you've already pumped that oxygen into the wastewater. The bacteria have it available to them if only, and the if only is you put them in a condition where there's no free oxygen so that they have to work harder. They will breathe that oxygen, and as they do, they'll consume BOD. So it's almost wasteful to not seek an opportunity for any plant that's removing ammonia to denitrify. A little comment subtly put down here in the bottom in red as we get into the phosphorus, which will be the next little exercise. We want to be mindful about the nature of the BOD and which of our favorite little bacteria are going to be eating that kind of BOD. The bacteria that push the nitrate to nitrogen gas, their favorite food is volatile fatty acids, which is the one and only food that our friends, the phosphorus removing bacteria, will eat. So, we'll talk more about that here in just a moment. But to recap, summarize, close out, put a bow on, move on from nitrogen removal. Here's some rule of thumb. Doggone it, I keep meaning to change that slide. I want the nitrification ORP to be positive 150. I apologize for that. I have some slightly different hydraulic retention times here. And an SBR is very rare. You're going to have 6 hours. So we're not doing that. You're going to have much shorter than that during the air-on cycle. If there's any questions or comments on that, I'm happy to take a pause and juggle them. And if not, I'll move on to phosphorus. Anything on nitrogen that anybody wants to comment on or ask about?
There's nothing in the chat so far.
All right, so how much do I need to pay to get people to ask questions? No, we'll keep on going. We'll talk about that later, I guess. Love to have some questions and comments, so don't be shy, operators. Let's move on to phosphorus while you're pondering your questions for nitrogen or comments. There's 3 steps to phosphorus removal. Okay, that isn't too many. So let's understand those 3 steps. This is a repeat, so I'm just trying to help you lock this down. I like to say that much of this, unfortunately, is counterintuitive, kind of going the opposite of what we've been thinking before we really got into nutrient removal. So a little repetition helps bring it home, I think. So there's 3 steps to phosphorus removal, right? 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. So there they are. The first step is to prepare the food. All right, I got ahead of myself a moment ago, saying that the phosphorus removing bacteria are fussy eaters. By analogy, the panda bears, right? They eat the bamboo shoots. No bamboo shoots. Got these big black and white furry things that are breathless, kind of freaking out all the zoo visitors. So we got to keep them fed with fresh bamboo shoots. If we want phosphorus removal, biological phosphorus removal, we've got to create some volatile fatty acids or import them, or we won't have the food stuff that they want. Fortunately, they're pretty easy to make. It's a really short carbon compound for the chemists in the room, in the rooms, and it's the acid that's in the acid alkalinity ratio for anyone who does an anaerobic digester. I don't know, for those of you who don't, how significant that is, except if you kind of think it through, what does an anaerobic digester do? It vents off or puts to beneficial use methane gas, right? Creates methane gas. Methane gas is CH4. You can't get a shorter carbon molecule than 1 carbon, CH4. That's methane gas. So volatile fatty acids are 1 step away from CH4. So they're very short chain carbon molecules, very readily digestible, We've almost broken the organic matter down to methane gas, but not quite. When you do that, where does that happen? How do we monitor it? Okay, with a simple dissolved oxygen meter, you're going to be out of luck because we're way down in the anaerobic conditions. We're in the negative ORPs. I like to see that ORP of minus 200 or more. We're septic. We're just short of anaerobic digester making methane gas. To drive this, we're going to need a lot of BOD. Textbook values, 25 times as much. I don't know that I've ever put that to a test. I can't confirm that it's not 20 or 30, if a lot. And of course, it depends upon what kind of BOD it is, right? Some kind of BOD that breaks down easily to become the short-chain volatile fatty acids. Okay, you do a little simple math. If you've got, I don't know, pick a number, 4. You have 4 milligrams per liter of phosphorus that you need to remove. Soluble phosphorus, we're trying to remove soluble orthophosphate. We're gonna create the volatile fatty acids to remove 4 milligrams per liter of phosphorus. According to this, if we can believe it, you need about 100 milligrams per liter of BOD for that. Now, if you can believe the numbers I gave you for nitrogen, and assume you have 20 of nitrate removing, we needed 100 to 200 there, plus 100 here. So now we need 200 to 300 milligrams per liter of BOD for us to have an easy life removing nutrients. Many of you don't have that. It's going to complicate your life, and maybe that's something we should spend some time talking about before the session's over. How long do you need this? You need it long enough to go septic. If it's a side stream, which I'll show a couple illustrations, I like it to sit there for days. And I'll explain what I mean by that. If it's a mainstream as one of the tanks, it just needs to be there long enough to go septic. Of course, how long it is requires how aerobic your influent is and how strong the BOD is. The second of 3 steps, numero dos. The bacteria need to eat the volatile fatty acids. So we need to introduce the bacteria that are in and with the mixed liquor that we're trying to boost their population to be phosphorus removing bacteria. They need to interact with the volatile fatty acids in septic conditions. So we're bringing one or the other to join together, or we're doing it all in one tank. Same basic environment. And with the P release is what we're really talking about in this phase. So the fermentation was the creation of volatile fatty acids. The P release is when the volatile fatty acids are consumed, and the bacteria, in doing so, they actually release some phosphorus in the solution. So we've got to mix together the mixed liquor and the volatile fatty acids in a septic-like conditions. ORP tool for measuring that is minus 200. We need to control the nitrates, because if there's a lot of nitrates in and with the mixed liquor, as it gets introduced to the volatile fatty acids, the nitrate removing bacteria will outcompete the phosphorus removing bacteria for those volatile fatty acids. So we have a couple strategies to deal with that. One is we create enough volatile fatty acids to keep everybody happy, the kumbaya approach, I guess we should call that, or we keep them apart from each other so they don't fight. The Cain and Abel approach, I guess we would call that one. So we're going to make sure that we feed the nitrate removing bacteria the energy they need using something other than volatile fatty acids. Since they don't since they will eat hamburgers and potato chips and salads even, maybe even broccoli, unlike first George Bush famously said he didn't like broccoli. But anyway, I digress. So if we can get the nitrate-removing bacteria to come into contact with a supply of BOD, we can reduce the nitrate population so that then the volatile fatty acids we create, or most of them will be available to the phosphorus-removing bacteria.
Hey, Grant, we have a question.
Good.
How do you think acids of leachate being brought to your plant will affect the volatile fatty acid concentration and the nitrogen phosphorus removal?
Okay. That is really a fabulous question, and I tell you, a week ago I couldn't have answered it. So the timing is perfect. What I learned from an Ohio operator was that they received a fair amount of leachate at their municipal treatment plant. Pretty good sized treatment plant, so pretty good sized amount of leachate, I presume. What they said was leachate is very rich in BOD. It's also rich in some crazy other things, which I always thought was a reason to not accept leachate, but they found it to be very successful for them. He said, however, the chemistry of the BOD in leachate is pretty complicated. So they had to grow smart bacteria, and I'm being facetious here. They had to let the bacteria acclimate to the source of leachate BOD. And he further said, so there was a delay. So it took a while for the bacteria to get used to that. And I don't know, the delay, it sounded to me like it might have been a couple months before that bacteria really population developed that could adequately feed on that leachate. And then further what he said was once he developed that population, that he couldn't do a feast and famine. Because if he would dump doses of leachate, say once a week, then the bacteria that could break that down beneficially, there's not enough on the other 6 days of the week to keep them alive, and they die out so that by the time the dose comes, there's just too few of them to do what he needed. He says, so it's really important to the extent possible, to equalize the input of leachate. So if you're getting leachate that's dumped in once a week, you're well advised, based on my knowledge base of one treatment plant that I've never been to, but just discussed via email, to put in some kind of a container so that you can dose that leachate in a bit every day. And according to this fellow, in a fairly good sized plant in Ohio, I think it's about a 20 MGD plant, that if you can do that, you'll find that the BOD will help you in all of this that I'm talking about for creating for both nitrate removal and to create the volatile fatty acids. So a long-winded answer, but I think it merited that much discussion. Great question. And like I said, till a week ago when I did a webinar in Ohio and got that feedback, I wouldn't have been able to answer that question. If this particular thing is working well for you, if you've got a good environment and a good population of bacteria and they're performing like you want, the craziest thing happens, which is your soluble phosphorus increases. So step one in removing phosphorus is you can do a process control tool, monitor the phosphorus coming out of this septic basin or tank, and you'll see about 3 times as much, soluble phosphorus, orthophosphate, coming out as what goes into that tank. That's when you have it dialed in. So you're 2/3 of the way there. is done with the septic part of it. You've energized the bacteria that will remove phosphorus, but they have yet to grow. And it's when they grow that they actually suck it out of solution. So that's the third step. And they need to breathe free oxygen, almost said pure oxygen. They need to breathe dissolved oxygen, not combined oxygen, DO, and have just enough BOD in that water to add the carbon molecules that we all have that are building blocks for our bodies. And then as they grow, as they multiply, they'll suck the phosphorus out of solution so that it gets pretty darn close to non-detect in solution when it's dialed in perfectly, like down to 0.05. And as you can see from this ORP, the same chart I've been using from the good people at YSI, then for this step, the phosphorus uptake, which is the final step, requires a fairly high dissolved oxygen, fairly high ORP. You go all the way up to the top there and see nitrification. Okay, that's the ammonia removing oxygen requirement. So if there's enough oxygen to remove ammonia, you've got enough oxygen to remove phosphorus. So that's a good process control trick to remember that, geez, my air tank's got enough oxygen to remove ammonia. If I'm not getting the phosphorus removal in the aeration tank, it's probably not because of too low of an ORP or too little dissolved oxygen, because there's enough for ammonia removal, and as you can see from this little diagram, there should be enough for phosphorus removal. So what else do you need? You need pH. That's usually the killer. The pH drops. And 6.8 I found is the true magic number. So if it drops to 6.7 for one day in the aeration tank, and on that one day, the phosphorus removing bacteria are on a phosphorus hunger strike. So all that phosphorus you released now is not getting uptake by anybody, and you can actually see a short spike in your effluent phosphorus may actually exceed what's coming in. pH, and I'm not talking final effluent pH, I'm talking pH in the aeration tank. Critical for phosphorus removal. Something I've seen, and particularly in warmer climates, like in Tennessee, in the summer months, as the water gets warm, the wastewater bacteria that live there that we've tricked into eating our wastes, they grow a lot faster in the warm weather, right? So if we have a series of tanks preceding our aeration tank, it's possible that we are the bacteria are consuming pretty much all the BOD before it even gets to aeration. And if that's the case, there may not even be enough BOD in the aeration tank to provide the building blocks, right, to grow. It's like your children need milk, right, when they're young. So they need the building blocks to grow. So that we've seen that in, particularly in Tennessee, in Athens, Tennessee. They're struggling with phosphorus removal in summer months in the dairy that discharges into the treatment plant, the Ustanala plant, increases production, increase the BOD loading on the plant, and voila, in the summertime their phosphorus removal improves. Pretty interesting. Counterintuitive, right? Not supposed to be better with more BOD. So summarizing this, we need two things going on in anaerobic conditions, and then we have things going on in aerobic conditions. And in our anaerobic conditions, we're creating the food source, the bacteria in with the mixed liquor are consuming the volatile fatty acids, releasing phosphorus in the solution. For all practical terms, that ortho-P, orthophosphate, is the same as soluble phosphorus, as it forms the phosphorus that will pass through a filter. For process control, you don't need to worry about the total phosphorus. That's in your permit limit. But the total phosphorus includes the soluble phosphorus that will pass through a filter, plus the phosphorus that's in your effluent TSS. All right. So you want to keep your effluent TSS as low as possible. That's one full process parameter that you manage as a wastewater treatment plant operator. And it's compatible with phosphorus removal, but the thing for phosphorus removal is to get it out of solution and get it into TSS, and then sweat about removing whatever phosphorus is in with your TSS. It's only going to be as high as 5% of the TSS. So if TSS is 10, that's 5%. What is 5% of 10? Is it 0.5 or is it 0.05? 0.5, I guess. Yeah, 0.5. So to meet a 1, which is our target, I think, in most jurisdictions that we're looking for, we really need to get that soluble phosphorus into the TSS. Any questions or comments on that before I go through some process illustrations for phosphorus removal? No? All right. We're about 40 minutes in. We're going to do a little more work, and then we'll have a break right around 11 o'clock Central Time, noon Eastern Time. So I've got Joe Nowak here communing with his bacteria in his treatment plant. That zone immediately behind his face, you can see that wall in the rear that's going over. That's an anaerobic zone in the Upper Blackstone, Massachusetts treatment plant. And I think he's wishing the bacteria to remove more phosphorus. So in mainstream, how are people designing phosphorus removal? This is not going to apply to SBRs, is it? We don't have anything like this, that you have an anaerobic zone ahead of aeration. It really doesn't fit with what we're doing. It's going to make it problematic for an SBR. There is no anaerobic zone in most of them. Although there's one design that I'll be showing you, it's called the ISAM design by Fluidine, where they have installed ahead of the SBR an anaerobic zone. It'd be interesting to me to know if anybody has that. And I don't know. Let's ask that question. Can we do a yes/no question right now? I'm going to assume we can. So, do any of you have an anaerobic zone ahead of an SBR? Please answer yes. If not, please answer no. And then Mark or Allie, if you could tell me.
Yes will be a check mark and an X will be a no. So just in the participation section, put a check mark for a yes or an X for a no. So I'm seeing Billy Anderson has a no, Casey Clear, no, Chris Kevin. I'm seeing a lot of no's, no yeses right now.
Yeah, let's wait just a moment, see if we have any yeses.
I got one yes.
You do? All right. All right. Do we know what plant it is? Is that okay to talk about? I don't want to embarrass anybody.
We'll let them mention it in the chat if they'd like.
Yeah, okay, why don't you? The one that said a yes, if you could put that in the chat, that'd be real interesting.
Brightwater.
Where is it?
Brightwater?
With a B?
Brightwater treatment in Washington.
Washington State?
Yeah, that's what it says.
Holy crud, is it even morning there yet? I don't... All right. Well, that's interesting. All right, so nobody in Tennessee, but we got one out there in Washington State.
Correct. I don't see any other yeses.
All right. My wife always makes fun of me when I say Washington because I put an R in it.
Washington?
Yeah, I grew up in Kansas. I'm going to say it the way I want to say it. So where was I before okay, so if we're talking non-SBRs here for just a moment, one design strategy is to put an anaerobic tank in front of it, or in the case of Brightwater, Washington, they've got anaerobic zone in front of the SBR, which I'm going to put an illustration of that up here in the latter half of this presentation. Again, not really SBRs, but we had this issue of the nitrates, right? The nitrates that are in the return sludge. And I'm going to go up here and shop and see if I can find one of my little tools. And while I do that, it makes for some irritating blockouts on yours, and I apologize for that. So in and with this return sludge is going to be nitrates, right? If in here you're taking ammonia, you're converting it to nitrate, the nitrates are going to continue to flow into the clarifier. Some of that water goes out, in fact most of it, and some of the solids, in fact, we're paid to keep most of them in here, fall to the bottom, and in and with those solids that fall to the bottom is water that contains nitrates. So as the nitrates come around, this design provides an opportunity for the bacteria that remove nitrates to use the BOD that's coming. If you have primary clarifiers, you have primary effluent. If there's no clarifiers, in the raw wastewater. So they're using that BOD to convert the nitrates to nitrogen gas, which would then bubble out of this tank. Then as the mixed liquor continues into here, now mixed with the influent, there's very few nitrates, so whatever volatile fatty acids get produced here, the majority of them will be available for phosphorus removal. So that's the design concept here. You get more bang for your buck on your VFAs. So for side streams, what we talked about in the previous sessions was some clever folks came up with the idea of let's grow volatile fatty acids off to the side here. I've fallen in love with my little marker, so bear with me. So we're going to grow volatile fatty acids here, and we can actually manage them. You can measure how many there are. You can send the prescribed amount of volatile fatty acids in here to meet your demand for phosphorus removal. Again, in this design concept, there's nitrates in with the return. They're going to outcompete the phosphorus bacteria for those volatile fatty acids, so going to have to produce an abundance of volatile fatty acids. To solve that, I may have to close out my tool here. Solve that, some smart people came up with this idea of putting this tank in a vent, this pre-anoxic tank, and that pre-anoxic tank, this pre-anoxic tank then would use the influent BOD, keeping the BOD, the volatile fatty acids, more available for the phosphorus removing bacteria. All right, so what's that have to do with an SBR? Basic information that we're going to apply when we try to get our SBRs to remove phosphorus. We don't remember this stuff, just makes our job more difficult. This is what really excites me, frankly, in this business. What makes me like my job so much is getting creative. It's really important and very rewarding, and it's being a good steward and a mensch to take a treatment plant that's designed for nitrogen removal, that's designed for phosphorus removal, and to get it to run at an optimum. You don't do enough of that, and if people from some of these training classes gives you tools to run your facilities designed for nutrient removal better, that's great. I'm very happy for that. The next step is what really excites me, which is folks that have facilities not necessarily designed for total nitrogen or biological phosphorus removal, and have figured out a way to out-engineer the engineers by making facilities perform better than they were designed to perform. And for phosphorus removal, there's really two ways to do that. One way is a side stream, probably by far and large the most common way, and we'll bring that into the SBR here probably after our break. So you take your old sludge storage tank right here, sludge storage, maybe it's aerated, maybe it's humongous and has all your sludge in it. So you take that, and we're going to turn the air off. You can turn it on for an hour or two a day if you want to keep it mixed up. You certainly can turn it on when you're dewatering, but for the most time, keep it off. And it goes septic pretty fast. And if you take some sludge out of there, then it becomes a fermenter. So we take some of that waste sludge and we pump it back into the aeration tank. What happened in that fermenter? Two things happen, and this is going to be important for taking an SBR and getting phosphorus removal. This is going to be my number one recommendation for you to look at. And I've personally had great success in working with a couple facilities. Don't yet have enough of a track record, but boy, it's looking like it's going to work well for them. A couple in Kansas. The one that I had success with is right here in Connecticut. It's one that we've been operating, my company has been operating for over 20 years. What happens when you turn the air off in the sludge holding tank? Of course, it goes septic. As it goes septic, you create volatile fatty acids. Probably recall me saying that any treatment plant that receives septic trucked in septic tank pump outs, every truckload has got a huge amount of volatile fatty acids. So you're doing that right in your own little sludge holding tank. You're making it septic. It's creating volatile fatty acids. Now the advantage here is your waste sludge. Pull my favorite little red fuzzball tool out here. Waste sludge coming into this, what used to be your sludge storage tank, is now a sludge storage tank and fermenter. Excuse me. There's a lot of bacteria in there, right? They're the very same bacteria that are in your return sludge line, even if it's a separate waste line off of your clarifier, same bacteria. So as the volatile fatty acids are created under septic conditions, fermented conditions, the bacteria in your waste sludge, they'll eat them. They're trying to stay alive. And as they eat that, they're becoming energized and they're releasing phosphorus in the solution. So if it ends there, you're going to have phosphorus in solution coming out of your sludge tank, which when you dewater will be a measurable, perhaps even significant contribution to your total phosphorus load. If you manage it correctly, you'll have maybe 3-4 times as much phosphorus in solution as what was coming in. You'll have energized bacteria. And if you take about 10%, and I really haven't messed with that number, I don't know 5% or 20% what they do, but I tried 10% once and I've stuck with it. It works pretty well. You take 10% of whatever the pounds you waste that you return back in, you've got enough energized phosphorus removing bacteria that when they're in the aeration tank, they should be enough to drive phosphorus removal so that your effluent is pretty low numbers. And I'll be sharing 3 examples around the country of plants that have done just this. Any questions or comments on that?
Nothing in chat so far.
All right. What I think I'm going to do is I'm going to jump ahead here and then I'll back up. I'm going to jump to my break slide, or no, a survey and then a break slide, right? So let's do that. One more polling question, and then we'll take a 5-minute break. So let's just get back at, say, a couple minutes after 11. How's that? So Mark, if you want to do the polling question, and then the folks can do that over the next 5 minutes, and then we'll otherwise take a break and rejoin them.
Sure thing. So I'm going to open it right now. What region is your plant located? We'll leave this open for about 5 minutes during the break, and then I'll close that out after the break. All right, we're going to close out the poll. And I'm going to hand over presenter capabilities back over to you, Grant.
Okay. All right, if everything's working right, you can again hear me and see me. Lucky you. So finally, an hour into this thing, we're to the advertised content. So sequencing batch reactor. They are designed for total nitrogen removal. Most, all of yours, with the exception of somebody in Hawaii or wherever it was out there in Washington State, are not designed for phosphorus removal. So any sequencing batch reactor, in theory, should be producing an effluent with a total nitrogen of below 10. If not, there's some process control tools that we should discuss. So let's go through how the sequencing batch reactor removes nitrogen. So there's always exceptions, right? There's typically 2 or more active SBR tanks. And because I'm lazy, I only put 2 on my screen. So 1 or more of the SBRs is active, air on, number 1, and 1 or more is idle, number 2. So the active one is receiving screened influence. Most SBRs do not have primary clarifiers. In fact, I don't know of any that do. Again, I'm sure there's exceptions, but most don't. So as the wastewater comes in and it's aerated, BOD is removed and ammonia is converted to nitrate. It's nitrified. We've reduced the ammonia, all but eliminated the ammonia, reduced it to a low number. This happens, that tank continues to fill. The nitrates remain when the air is turned off. Then there's a transition as it goes from aerobic, the oxygen that's in there, the free oxygen gets breathed by the bacteria. Even though no more oxygen is being added, they're going to breathe the oxygen that's there until it's all but depleted. The dissolved oxygen will drop. As the dissolved oxygen drops, the ORP with some delay will drop, because remember, the ORP doesn't measure how much oxygen's in the tank, it measures what the bacteria are doing with the oxygen. So they're going to keep breathing it until there's no more oxygen to breathe, and then they're going to be looking for a new source of oxygen. And looky there, we just gave them a whole bunch of oxygen, nitrate. Unfortunately, or fortunately, they need BOD to drive that, to energize them to remove that oxygen off the nitrate. Well, in an SBR, BOD continues to pour in, coming in during an anoxic cycle. So during that cycle, we've got BOD coming in. We transition from aerobic to anoxic. That transition happens a lot faster in warm weather than it does in cold weather. And as we go through that transition, then the nitrogen gas is going to be created, and nitrogen gas will escape into the atmosphere out of the surface of the SBR. Most SBRs mix during this anoxic cycle. There's enough turbulence, pretty hard to see that nitrogen gas bubbling out. Pretty small bubbles. However, some SBRs, the one that we've been running for 20 plus years, does not mix during the air-off cycle. The influent is piped into the very bottom of it, which is really very nice design. So the influent goes into a settled blanket, and as it does, the BOD goes into a low oxygen zone, diffused across the bottom of the SBR tank into the blanket, and the nitrates are converted to nitrogen gas. Right? So we've got 2 cycles here at least to manage. We can just take whatever the manufacturer set and run with it, but there's going to be seasonal changes. In the warmer weather, we don't need as much time to transition from an air-on to an air-on. In a warmer weather, the bacteria are going to be more active. They're going to want to pull the oxygen out of the water faster. They're going to grow faster. So we may need a longer air-on cycle just because the solubility of oxygen in the water isn't as good in the warm weather, and they're using so doggone much. We may actually need to increase the air-on in the summertime, and we may need to increase it. We may not. Depends on the biological population. We will almost certainly need to increase the air-off, the anoxic cycle, because it's going to take longer for that dissolved oxygen to get used up so that we can get into that minus 100 or whatever proves to be a good habitat for us for nitrate removal. And then the bacteria are going to be slower anyway to consume the nitrates. Thing you don't want to do, which I did once, and I hope to never repeat, is I got greedy, and I wanted more nitrate removal than my plant wanted to provide me in the winter, and I kept extending the air-off cycle until it got pretty doggone septic. And I remember that well. That was 15 plus years ago, and I caution you against that. Just accept as a fact, ACCEPT, as a fact, that particularly right around this time of year, you're getting near the end of the winter, don't want to lose your nitrifiers quite right now, stressing it out, yet they're stressed. They've had a hard winter going in and out of these cycles, and I did that. So I ran it too long, too negative, and I lost my nitrifiers for probably 6 weeks, and it took me quite a while to bring the whole plant back. Okay, there's also many plants will have shorter cycles once the main cycle's done. Once it shifts over and decants, right, you decant the clean water off the top, you wait some sludge off the bottom, then it becomes idle. Many facilities during that idle stage will go into a periodic freshening, air on, air off. I don't have enough experience with that type of operation to give you a lot of guidance how much they should be on and off. We just want to have an environment so that when the air's on, we keep our nitrifiers alive. And I'll tell you what, there's a fellow I respect tremendously named Michael Girardi. He's a microbiologist out of Pennsylvania. I often refer questions to him and occasionally employ him to help me out with things. as often as I can. And he's written a number of books, I think about a dozen books on activated sludge and big on nitrogen removal. And he tells me that nitrifiers can live up to 24 hours without air. So it's not going to hurt the bacteria that remove nitrogen, to remove bacteria that remove ammonia nitrogen, to be without air for 8, 10, 12 hours. So I'm not sure what those idle cycles really do for the bacteria. So we need cycle times that are long enough to provide the optimal habitats, but short enough to allow it to happen right during the fill cycle, or at least during the fill prior to decant cycle. Great tool is ORP for managing what's going on in the tank. Also effluent, ammonia, and nitrate. Now, one thing about an SBR when you're trying to do process control through the cycles, it's a little frustrating because there's, during that decant cycle here, oops, I don't show a picture afterwards, but after it decants, there's still an awful lot of water in that SBR. And that water is, except for the sludge that's sitting in the bottom, all the rest of that water, it's the same as the effluent. So it's low in nitrates, it's low in ammonia. So the first few gallons, when you bring that back online, those first few gallons of influent are getting diluted out in a huge volume of water, maybe 75 to 90%. You only decant maybe 10 to 25% of the volume. So it's really hard to monitor the ammonia or the nitrate through the cycle because there's so incredibly much dilution that goes on. So for an SBR, an ORP is a nice tool to use, in my opinion. These are rule of thumbs, right? What your targets are depends on a lot of things, but set your cycles so that you create, obviously, the quality of effluent. To create the quality of effluent you're looking for, you need two totally different environments, and that transition zone that happens in between them is basically lost time. I'm sure I'm overstating that, but it's unmanaged time. We can manage where we are during our react air-on cycle by the length of that cycle and the design and the amount of air pumped in, and we can manage our anoxic cycle again by how long that cycle is, and can even manage it by mixing. I'm one who says that mixing is overrated, and I really believe that. Sometimes too much mixing is in the way. I only need the mixing so that you don't have permanent settling. So a little bit of settling during the air-off cycle. Like I said, I've been running a plant for 20 years. I don't go there anymore every day like I used to for the first 3-5 years, but others working for me do. And that plant does not mix during the anoxic cycle. The influent goes down into that blanket, and it's better than having it mixed. It's better than having it mixed.
Hey, Greg, can I interrupt?
Sure.
Talking about settling in SBR, I cannot help but think about those poor diffusers. Tell me about them.
The poor diffusers. Okay. People are concerned about their diffusers plugging up, right? Well, in an SBR, there's an awful lot of time when there's no air going through the diffusers. If you're concerned about the weight on the diffusers, the weight of the sludge is fractionally more than the weight of the water, so it really isn't hurting the diffusers. Worrying about water going back through the diffusers into the blowers when SBR is designed to run with the blowers off for long periods of time. So in an SBR, I don't think you should worry about those poor diffusers, Karina.
Does it matter whether we have coarse bubble, fine bubble, what type of diffuser we have?
Jet aeration? No, I don't think it does matter. Jet aerations are pretty nice. I like those. However, they're also used for the mixing during the air off, which I don't really, I've never run one day in and day out, but I don't think they need as much jet aeration. Actually, I misspoke. We did run one of those for several years. And having some blanket form during the anoxics, if you can get the influent down into that blanket, helpful. So, I don't know. It's a concern, frankly, more in non-SBR plants. People often express that concern, and my recommendation there is, to check with your engineer and your equipment manufacturers. But I'll be honest with you, I've probably recommended to 50 treatment plants that they cycle the blowers off, conventional plants that did not cycle them off. And I've never had anybody tell me that it caused them any kind of problems. The biggest concern I heard expressed that had me nervous was in Montana, where they said, it gets to minus 20 for about a week or two every year. I'm not sure turning my blower off and then trying to kick it back on when it's minus 20. So I asked him to check with the manufacturer. He did. He said the manufacturer said, no, that's fine. And he now runs his blowers about half the time year round with no problems. Any other questions, comments? So these facilities are designed for total nitrogen removal. Total nitrogen removal meaning ammonia gets converted to nitrate. That's ammonia removal. And then that continues. The nitrates are continued or converted to nitrogen gas. The nitrogen gas bubbles out of the tank, goes and pollutes the atmosphere, which is already 3/4 nitrogen, so it doesn't mind the pollution. It's not pollution. It's what our atmosphere is. It's mostly nitrogen.
I had just one comment that came in regarding the leachate.
Yeah.
I'm a little late on that. It came in time, but it's that we can enter the, drip the leachate in slowly. If we introduce it at slower rates and not as a batch, then that could help as well.
Perfect. Okay, great. There's never too late. All right. That's a great comment. Right. So you want to dose it in. So if you're trucking it in once a week and you can figure out a way to drip it in so that your tank empties over pretty much close to a week, that's ideal. All right. I think we already did this. And we already did that. And I was going to repeat this because I thought I would get up to the break and then I would repeat it, but I don't need to. So let's jump to phosphorus removal. Are we ready for that? Is there anything anybody wants to talk about? We've got 10, 25 minutes left before we get into the tricking these plants to remove phosphorus. 1, 2, 3. All right, hearing none, I'm going to go venture forward bravely. So there's two ways to do this. One is in the mainstream, and frankly, I've never seen anybody do this, and I don't really recommend it. But theoretically, you could turn the anoxic cycle off long enough, turn off the mixing, and make it go anaerobic during your air-off cycle. If anybody was to try this, and again, I've never done this at any plant, I would do it in a plant that has very long cycles. So I'm running with cycles where I don't need that air. I don't need to bring that tank on, but it's off more than half the day kind of situation. Then you could tempt fate and try to run your anoxics into an anaerobic condition and see if you could get a sludge blanket at the bottom. Although I've never seen anyone do this in an SBR, I've seen folks do it, multiple folks do it in oxidation ditches, where they run their oxidation ditch in an air-on mode and in totally no aeration, and allow the solids to settle to the bottom enough that in the bottom there's anaerobic conditions. So theoretically it holds. Its practicality, I've probably said enough. So what then am I recommending? Side stream. You already got the hint. I talked about it when I did that schematic earlier. We're going to create a side stream fermenter using some sludge storage, either an existing sludge storage. My first example, East Haddam, Connecticut, the facility I ran. I did this actually by accident. I'll tell you the story. Or in an SBR where there is some old tankage or some extra tankage, some available tankage that can be used as a fermenter. Maybe it was never designed. Nobody thought it was ever going to be a fermenter, but you can make it into a fermenter. I'll give you an example in Kansas where they used a clarifier to do this. And another example in another community in Kansas where they took one of their 3 aerobic digesters and fermented there. My rule of thumb, and I said earlier, tried this and kind of worked, so I didn't mess with the number, but pretty unscientific, huh? Took about 10% of the waste sludge, hold it in the fermenter for 2 to 10 days, long enough to go nice and septic, and then return that material back in to the SBR. So you either do it at the dose, or you have a container that's big enough to hold, have a container that's big enough to hold a week or two's 10% of the waste sludge. So container is big enough to hold about 1 day's wasting. And then we put about 10% of what you waste in there every day, and then 10% comes out every day because it's displaced. And we send that back, not the clear water, but the mixed liquor, back into the SBR. Ideally, you send it back into the SBR during the react mode. But if you can't really manage it that well, not to worry, just send it back. Send it back during any time of day, or even automate it so that it comes on a timer. I can tell you it works. Does that make sense? Anybody has any questions on that? That's a good one to ask, because I'm going to give you now some examples of facilities that have done this. Oh, no, I'm not. First, I'm going to talk about this bright water kind of design. Any questions before I get into that? I want to show you what exists as an engineered SBR that has a pre-anaerobic zone, mainstream, designed in. So now I've gone from looking at 2 SBRs sideways, I'm doing a helicopter view over 3, okay, if you'll bear with me. And these are rectangular, they can be round, they can be square. They could be the shapes of parameciums. What do they used to call that? In the 60s, we wore that in our clothes. Ridiculous shape. Can be that. It doesn't matter what shape they are. It's just the top view. So 3 SBRs I got a little less lazy. Instead of 2, now I have 3, and I'm looking at them from the top view. So in an SBR, number 1 might be the active, while 2 and 3 we're in an idle mode. And then once 1 is done, maybe 2 would be active, while 1 and 3 are in an idle mode, yada, yada, through that. We have multiple SBRs. I'm just looking at them from the top. Waste sludge is going to go off into some kind of vessel, tank, container. And if we're doing side stream, right, we're going to take some of that sludge, turn the air off in that, and bring it back into, in this case I'm showing it going back into one of the SBRs. It would probably go into wherever the influence splitting device is. This would be an ideal. You're actually pumping it back during its react cycle. So in that sludge with the air off, create the volatile fatty acids. Some of the waste sludge that's sitting there is really not now waste sludge because you just kind of temporarily put it in anaerobic conditions. While it was in the anaerobic conditions, it interacted with the volatile fatty acids that its brethren who died created as they died and decayed. So it ate on those volatile fatty acids, and then the energized sludge, which is now mixed, was returned as mixed liquor. During the air on, they're going to go to work, they're going to multiply and pull phosphorus out of solution. Now obviously, periodically, you got to pull sludge out of that sludge holding tank and truck that sludge away and the phosphorus that's in it. That's how you get rid of it. Eventually, it gets taken off-site. It's trucked away, it's land applied, it's taken to landfill. Here in the Northeast, we stupidly burn it, goes into the atmosphere. But there's some way that has to be removed from the facility, otherwise you're just piling the sludge phosphorus up and up. Well, that's an illustration of that side stream approach. Now I want to illustrate, I've worked with one, and it'd be interesting, the one in Brightwater. Maybe I did do a webinar with a short one with some folks in the Puget Sound area, and I think Brightwater might have been in on it, so maybe that's the connection. And be interesting for me to know if this is the type of facility you have. If you don't mind putting that in the chat, letting the moderators, Mark or Allie, can take a look at that, maybe pass it on. So I'm starting with the same picture I just had. And now we're going to add some tanks in front of it. In the facility I worked with, and I never went there, I just worked with it remotely, I was in Iowa, and it's a fluidine facility. The people from Fluidine, I really like them, so Targi Matt was very helpful, and we were trying to sleuth out the phosphorus removal. So what this is designed to do, and I'm going to get my little fuzzball marker here. Maybe I'm not. There it is. Okay, so how this is designed to work is the raw wastewater, screen wastewater comes in, and this is just an anaerobic tank. So there's limited mixing, enough to keep materials, some of the materials suspended, but we're really trying to run this as a septic tank to create volatile fatty acids. And then it comes around the bend, and there's a little interchange here between these tanks so that mixed liquor leaks back in here or is actually actively pumped back in here. So we're creating the volatile fatty acids in this one. At least this is my understanding and recollection. And as it comes in here, it interacts in anaerobic conditions still with mixed liquor in which we're growing phosphorus removing bacteria. So again then, in here, this is still septic. We've got the volatile fatty acids migrating in here, interacting in septic conditions with the mixed liquor, and we're getting the phosphorus release consuming the volatile fatty acids, which means as the flow then goes into whichever is the active SBR, we've got enriched, energized, phosphorus-removing bacteria, and during the aeron cycle, we'll have some phosphorus uptake by the bacteria, so they'll concentrate the phosphorus in their body, so that now the bacteria that are wasted are of a higher concentration of phosphorus. The effluent is a lower concentration of phosphorus, and phosphorus is removed from the scene when the sludge is removed from this tank. Optimizing this facility in Iowa involved limiting the mixing in here so that we get septic enough conditions to create the volatile fatty acids, and having enough but not too much interchange here with the bacteria to consume it. We're really focused on monitoring these two habitats to get the VFA production and the phosphorus release. I don't know, did you hear back from our friends in Washington? Is that similar to the kind of facility they have?
Nothing in the chat.
These outside agitators, don't you? You know, you're always the one.
We have a question in the chat about how are the cycles adjusted for an ichthys process?
Okay. The ichthys process, I think what they mean by that, and I can't remember what the intermittent something or other. What happens in that is, if I go back, let me go back here. Excuse the clicking noises. So in an ichthys process, if I have it right, and if I don't, please correct me, you never have an air, you never have an idle. It even decants while influence coming in. That's my understanding of what ichthys is all about. And that's the way that the plant that my company's been running for 20 years operates. We only run one SBR. It's designed for 55,000 gallons a day. We're getting about 15 to 20,000 gallons a day. And it's seasonal. There's the major contributor is a little opera house, and the opera house and beer garden that goes with it closes down in the winter. Right now it's closed. So the flow is way down. But during the summer, even then, it's rarely over 20, let alone 25,000 gallons a day, so it's running less than half design capacity. Because, as I said, this influent, get my marker, this influent actually goes into the bottom of it. So if it was decanting, we'd be getting influent coming in at the same time it's decanting. So how do you manage the cycles there? Really no differently. You don't manage them any differently at all from a conventional SBR. Unless I'm missing something, and whoever wrote that in, please say more if I missed the point. All right, hearing no more, we think that either the person gave up on me or I was close enough. All right, we have about 10 minutes left, so let's talk about some case studies. Designed for nitrogen removal, not designed for phosphorus removal. How do they get phosphorus removal? Here's that little town in Connecticut I'm talking about. Real cute little town, rocky, hilly place right on the Connecticut River. There's the Opera House front and center. And the swing bridge is really cool. Instead of a drawbridge, it actually pivots. So the locals love it and hate that bridge. Tourists love it. The locals like it because it brings them the tourists, but they kind of grunt about it. Off to the right is the treatment plant. It's inside a building, totally enclosed. These folks didn't want to look at a sewage treatment plant, so they made one that looked like a little waterfront cottage, kind of, sort of. I don't have any pictures, any graphs, or anything. What happened was I went to a conference a long time ago, maybe 20 years ago, and in the conference they were talking about something called the Cannibal Process. And the Cannibal Process was an idea, and I think it's not really a bad idea. It's an idea that if you could make the environment right, a lot of the bacteria are going to degrade and eat each other so that you don't have to waste as much sludge. So I talked to the presenter afterwards. I was real excited about it, and I had this little bitty plant. Here I was, 15 years into my career, and I started my own business, and I was going to this little plant with 15,000 gallons per day. So I was looking for projects. So the idea, he said, was I just needed to aerate that tank, sludge holding tank once a day, but otherwise leave it non-aerated. Okay, later I learned that was to keep it from becoming a methane producing, so that my BFAs would not break down the methane. And then he said take about 10%, this is where the magic number came from, of my sludge and feed it back into my SBR, and that should go back as food source, and then they would start to digest that, and then I would have much less waste to get rid of, the sludge. So I did that for 2 months, and it was kind of a pain in the patoot because I didn't have the best equipment, and I spent probably half an hour every day kind of cleaning debris out of my submersible pump that I was transferring the sludge from the sludge holding tank back into the SBR. So after a couple of months, being a very important guy, I had better things to do with my life, so I quit doing it. And I forgot all about it. Years went by, 3, 4, 5 years. Now, Connecticut requires twice a month effluent phosphorus testing, even for a little plant like that, even 20 plus years ago. Well, I started to learn about phosphorus, 10, 15, 12 years ago, sometime back. And I thought, man, I wonder what happened. So I pulled out the data, and sure enough, during those 2 months, the phosphorus effluent, which prior to that was always right around 3 milligrams per liter, and always after that was right around 3 milligrams per liter, but for those 2 months, those 4 samples, twice a month, were 0.3. So I thought, man, we're on to something. So let's take that to another one. Fast forward to last year, Pratt, Kansas. One MGD plant, in the middle there, some old trickling filters, some old clarifiers, to the right, storm basin, equalization basin, flow now comes in the plant, goes to the 2 SBRs, works its way out, disinfected, and goes to South Fork as a Munisca, is that what it is? Goes into the receiving water. All right? A lot of abandoned tanks in between. Abandoned trickling filters, abandoned clarifiers, got some digesters up there to the kind of top left. Well, based on that experience and a few years of other experiences in between, I talked to the plant staff there, Jeff Shanline, great guy. Jeff said, well, let's take some of the sludge from our SBR and let's use one of our old clarifiers. And let me figure out kind of a volume. So I want to pump about 10% of what I would pump as waste, and I want to keep it in there for somewhere between 1 to 2 weeks. So I'm going to pump this much a day, and I'm going to pick an elevation in that clarifier, and then I'm going to pump it back. So he pumps over to his clarifier, and I don't remember the number, a couple thousand gallons a day. Oops, pushed the wrong button. and he pumps back 10,000 gallons. But while it's in that old clarifier, if it's 1,000 gallons, he's holding about 15,000 gallons. So it gets displaced, a little bit of mixing goes on, periodically we'll mix it, turns septic, sits in there long enough for VFA production, and then VFA consumption and phosphorus release. It had a nitrogen spike, which unfortunately don't have numbers after, immediately went away. It was almost all ammonia. There's something weird happened there. Maybe it was related to this. I would bet that it was not. And the phosphorus, you can see, dropped late last year when he first set this up. Now you can see it's been low at other times, but look what time of year it's typically low. Typically low in the winter. Very rarely has it been low in the summer. So that's very encouraging to us. We're looking forward to seeing when we have 6-12 months worth of data. Did this really work in Pratt like we think it did? The state there is very excited about that. Okay, and then my final example, and I can wrap this thing up, is Osawatomie, Kansas. Also has a huge stormwater storage, you can see there, but the main flow goes to the 2 SBRs, disinfected and then out. So Bruce Hurt actually began before Pratt. I saw them the year before, so I saw them in late, met with Bruce in late 2019. So he's using both his SBR and in his case he's using one of his 3 sludge digester cells. Turning the air off on that, sending waste sludge there, letting the magic happen, create the volatile fatty acids. The volatile fatty acids are consumed by the phosphorus removing bacteria, phosphorus is released, and then that's pumped back in the SBR. And if you look, if I take that arrow, oops, and kind of look, when the arrow disappears, you see a white line right underneath it. You can see that, that's the temporary pipe he set up. And he has it set so that it self-drains. He didn't want it to sit in that pipe. And then after we talked about it, he said, oh, geez, because it has to go over a wall to get out of the sludge digestion tanks. It goes over like a 5-foot, 6-foot tall wall. And then he didn't want it to pond in there and go septic. And then we talked about that, you know, it actually is better if it did. So this spring, he's going to be laying that on the ground, and if he can get some consistent numbers, then they're going to retrofit it and make it a more permanent setup so they can year-round cycle septic or cycle 10% of his waste sludge back. So unfortunately, I didn't update it with the data recent, but you can see his initial numbers. Oh, that's the nitrogen numbers, and then you can see some good phosphorus numbers starting to appear. You see this dialing this in. And that, the Eldora one, I think we're out of time. I think I already talked about that. So let's rate our knowledge, and I think, unless there's any other questions, we'll call it a wrap. So back to you, Mark.
Thank you. Let me transfer over. On a scale from 1 to 5, how much do you know about nutrient removal in SBRs, with 5 being expert and 1 being new to the topic? So we'll leave that open for a few minutes, and then we'll close it out. Looks like everyone about answered, so I'm going to close it out in a few more seconds. All right. I'll hand it back to you, Grant.
All right, I'm not seeing the results. Did you have them up there?
Yeah.
Oh, there they are. Okay. I think we moved up a little bit. That's encouraging. Thank you, folks. All right, let's see where we are. This is my version. That's not an oxidation ditch. That's a GMC ditch. So we don't need to do any of that. I think I'm going to give my acknowledgements, which there are many. And I'm sure I left people out. So thank you all. Thank you for the team here. I don't think I properly acknowledged all you. I apologize for the whole behind-the-scenes team, and I didn't even list one of you up there. So thank you all. Next week, we're going to talk about optimizing not just phosphorus removal, nitrogen and phosphorus removal in conventional extended aeration treatment plants. And then finalize, we'll wrap the whole thing up on St. Patrick's Day, talking about any of the plants that any volunteers want to put forward. There's a few that we picked, and there may be still spots for folks. So if you're interested, let us know. And with that, I thank you. And any final questions coming in from anybody, or should we pull the plug?
I'm not seeing anything.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Done. All right. Bye now.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.